Today, we're going to talk about real-ationships. This is a must in the hyper-connected world we live in today. I find it interesting how changing a letter or two can open up a whole new arena for a person's mind. In listening to a sermon recently, the word real-ationships was coined and discussed in a spiritual sense. But I found that it actually opened a whole new view for me in terms of leadership. The idea was very illuminating and very liberating, because much of what we discuss today has a virtual feel to it and many times leaves us feeling disconnected and alone, even though we're buried in data and virtual relationships. Today, I'd love for you to take a trip back with me to the late 1950s in America and other countries around the world. There was no internet, limited television, and only readily available electronic communication devices were the wired phone and telegraph. How many of us remember our grandparents' house that had a stoop or a front porch on it? And people would walk by after dinner and they would reminisce about what had gone on in their day. And this was our basic form of connection at this point in time. Everyone shared the news, the gossip, and any other relevant or irrelevant information they felt like sharing. I truly believe we've respected each other more during this era, but don't get me wrong, I'm not going to idolize this period. I choose it as an example of how we need to adapt today. Today we come home from work, open the garage door from our cars, park the car, close the door, then retire to the television or the backyard, and we have little interaction along the way with our neighbors. Now, at work in the 1950s, it was a whole different story. Yes, people more than likely had a good friend or two at work, but the relationship of employees to leadership was on a much more narrow track. The relationship between groups was much more socially siloed than today. There was a major chasm between employees and leadership. Today, we are skill siloed, but we still feel isolated and also lacking in relationships. In the 50s, companies hid behind closed doors, making decisions about people's lives based on the view that everyone was an expense that needed to be controlled. Not a whole lot different today. Leadership controlled employees, unions controlled employees, CEOs controlled managers, and boards were relatively ineffective. That being said, every element was an expense and the company was the entity that needed to be protected. Not the person, not the human, the company. Leadership became much more studied as a topic in schools and universities during this period, and it created a very specialized role that has been viewed as critical for the success of any company. It almost felt like a sterilization of the role with the goal of creating robots. Isolation was apparent and still is in many companies. What I would like to have you feel today is the connection vibe that was taking place in personal relationships during that period, because this is what we need to bring back into the business environment today. It's time we reintroduce the concept of real into relationships. Now, you may be asking what I mean by real. Well, it begins with some simple concepts. First, real authenticity. It is really time for us to bring back authenticity into the business relationship. This means being truthful about histories and conversations that take place during the day. It must be part of every relationship, from employees to leaders to customers to stockholders. No one is to be considered more superior than the other in the sense that there must be common vision, principles, values, and goals. Otherwise, the company is doomed to suffer. In 2012, for example, it was noted in Japan there were over 20,000 companies that were documented as being in excess of 100 years old. This is compared with the US, where today the average life of a corporation is 15 years, which is down from 57 in 1960. The difference lies in the size and relationships within the structures. Typically, the Japanese companies are smaller, usually more family-focused. They may be more hierarchical, but very much based on vision and values. Sustainability and relationships are a major part of these organizations. However, in many American companies, the size has grown so huge that people are lost, relationships are non-existent, and there is little to no vision. Now, the second real is real transparency. This is a difficult topic for business today because the question always comes up: how much transparency is too much transparency? I mentioned earlier how companies have hidden behind the stone walls of corporate structure in the past, but today the demand on companies is that they become even more human, more vulnerable, and more transparent. For example, today as I record this, we are dealing with the perceived lack of transparency by the NFL, the National Football League, in the domestic violence issues that it's dealing with. The press is hot to find out who knew what, when, and where. The public is pushing back in support of that whole questioning. Where did the transparency derail? Today, people are asking businesses, why are you in business? How does your product or service help me? Are all of your people and processes and products ethical? Do your products or services protect the environment? Is there a higher purpose that drives the company vision other than money? These are really tough questions that companies can no longer avoid. To survive, they must address them at all levels. If you are not willing to share at this level as a company, then people may exercise their option to find a competitor that is willing, able, and doing exactly that on a daily basis. The third is real connections. John Maxwell talks about the need for connection within relationships, and he is absolutely correct. In his book, Everyone Communicates, Few Connect, he goes so far as to say that connecting is a core skill required for success. However, he goes on to say that the ability to connect with others begins with the understanding of the value of people. At this point is critical to the concept of relationships. Jay Hall of Telemetrics once studied the performance of 16,000 executives and found a direct relationship between achievement and the ability to connect with people. He found that high achievers cared about people as well as profits, whereas low achievers were preoccupied with their own security. He also found out that high achievers also viewed subordinates optimistically and sought them out for advice, whereas the low achievers distrusted subordinates and did not seek out any consultation. This simply points out that if you want to have an advantage in working with people, then you must embrace practices and execute connecting skills. The fourth and final real is real friendships. It's unfortunate in our hyper-connected world today that we often brag about the fact that we have 800 contacts on LinkedIn, 3,500 on Twitter, and 400 on Facebook. The key is that these are casual friends, they're acquaintances. Similar to when you're at work or in school, you know them, but you don't know them. Robin Dunbar, the British anthropologist, speculated in 1992 that based on the size of the human brain and the underlying psychology, the number of people any one person could engage and maintain a stable interpersonal relationship with was between 100 and 200. More precisely, 150, according to many experts. That being said, the number of real friends is much lower than that because it requires an investment of emotions, intelligence, and spiritual energy on a regular basis. Intentionality is the key to developing real relationships, and the benefit to others is the motivation. I like to call this developing a proactive win-win attitude. A real friend requires commitment of time and chatting, caring, and most of all, being honest with each other. Real relationship. What are your thoughts on the subject? Does your company have a handle on the elements outlined, or are you still struggling? If you are struggling with this topic, please check out our website at http://tlg-rwme.us or call me at 630-935-3326 to discuss how we may help you. Thank you, and have a good day.